I'm going to do recommended draft policy 2018-6, clarify the reassignment requirements in section 42371. Okay, the shepherds for this policy are Alyssa Moore and Allison Wood. It was proposed as ARIN Policy Proposal 258. It was made a draft policy by the AC in November of 2018. Draft policies are when the AC realizes, looking at the proposal, that indeed there's a problem statement and that there's an actual issue to be worked on. If you submit your Christmas list to the AC, they'll not adopt it. If you submit something that's actually an operational suggestion, not having to do with number policy, again, it won't be adopted as a draft policy. But they realized there was a problem statement here regarding number policy. They adopted it as draft policy, at which point they assign shepherds and they begin to get input from the community to facilitate making a good policy. After several rounds, it ended up being revised and was recommended for adoption in July. It was presented at ARIN 43. The latest version was updated in November 20th of 2018. The draft policy clarifies reassignment requirements. The staff understanding is that the policy text makes a clear delineation in which reassignments are required to have customer point of contact and which ones do not have to have it. So reassign detail needs to have a customer point of contact information, and a customer simple reassign does not. And the language clarifies that. It's furthermore made clear that there's a requirement to SWIP/29 or more. That remains unchanged. That's as is in the current policy. The staff believes the text is clear and easily understood and can be implemented as written. It retains, ARIN Council has reviewed, it has no material legal issues. The resource impact is minimal. We can actually implement it if it turns out the community supports it and the AC sends it to the board and they ratify it. It would be 3 months after ratification. We'd update our staff training, internal guidelines, the documentation on the website, and we do customer outreach to inform them of this change. So I'll now have Alyssa come up and do the AC presentation of the policy. Green arrow to advance.
Good morning and happy Halloween. I'm happy that I'm not up here wearing a costume. There was a proposal that the AC do a group costume, but I'm quite happy to not be immortalized on YouTube presenting numbers policy all dressed up, but this evening. So as John said, this was first presented in Barbados, so it's been to one meeting. Since that time, we've advanced it to a recommended draft as the AC, so this is potentially the last time that you're seeing this at a meeting, so keep that in mind. So this is about, as John said, clarifying when it's necessary to do a simple versus a detailed reassignment. We were finding that there were certain organizations who were doing detailed reassignments for all of their downstream reassignments when it would have sufficed to do a simple one. And so we are intending to make that clearer and simpler in the language. Actually, before I go into the rest, I just want to do a bit of background. I did this in Barbados as well, around what reassignment versus reallocation versus simple versus detailed means. So first, an allocation from ARIN means that the recipient of that block of numbers can further subdelegate or redelegate to downstream customers. So that's an allocation. An assignment is intended to be used solely by the end user. You get an assignment from ARIN, the buck stops there, you use it in your own network. And then so it follows that a reassignment is then used by that further downstream end network, where reallocation can be further suballocated to other customers. So we're talking about reassignments. So here is the red line. This is pretty clear. First of all, we're striking out in the whois directory because whois, first of all, is kind of going the way of the dodo with RDAP. So cleaning up a bit of that language, taking the opportunity there. So shall be registered by a SWIP or a valid directory services system, which meets the standards set forth in section 3.2. So 3.2 defines what is necessary if you're a network operator and you are reassigning or reallocating addresses. So refer to that. It has to be a valid use of that. So that's clarity. And this, I'm just going to go through this. So the new language would say reassignments registrations must include each customer name except where specifically exempted by this policy. Reassignment registrations shall only include point of contact information if it's requested by the customer. So if a customer specifically wants to be called out with the detailed fields, information fields, then of course you can do that as a detailed reassignment. If requested by the customer or the reassigned block is intended to be routed and announced outside of the provider's network. So obviously in that case, you're going to want the abuse contact details and more detailed information. And then because we have cleaned up this language and we pulled out reallocations and dropped them down underneath, reallocation registrations must contain the customer's organization name and appropriate point of contact information. So here's a little screenshot of what it looks like to do a simple reassignment. So you're in ARIN Online, select the little simple reassignment bullet, and here are the details you'd be asked to put in. It would just be the organization's name and then their city. So the thinking behind this is that customers that you would give a simple reassignment to don't necessarily have the IT capacity to be able to field things like being contacted about abuse on the network or even know what ARIN or an RIR is. And so the idea is that their upstream would be responsible for that kind of network management. So in those cases, you would do a simple reassignment. We went through the staff and legal. John did that, so I'm not going to do that again. It was clean, pretty straightforward. The discussion on the mailing list and at the last meeting centered around the opposition was that this would serve to obscure bad actors, so you would only have the organization's name, and if they were being bad guys, then it would be more difficult to dig down into who that was. The reason that this was advanced is because there was a majority of support on the list and at the last meeting. So like I said, the majority of the customers with a /29 or shorter wouldn't understand what you were contacting them about anyways, so go to their upstream. So questions for discussion today. Is this appropriate contact information for simple reassignments? Do you agree that this is a good course of action? And is it a step towards clarity in the language? And that's it.
At this point, the vice chair will moderate the discussion of the cues. And Alyssa, you should stay up for any questions that might come. Go ahead.
All right, thank you, Alyssa, for proposal. Remind remote participants to get their comments in and remind people to state whether they're for or against the proposal. We'll start at the front and center microphone.
Hi, Kathy Aronson. I am probably for the proposal. Could you go back one slide? Somebody was talking in one of the, wherever I was yesterday, about the language we choose to talk about the size of the prefix. So /29 or shorter to me means that it's a big, shorter in prefixy land is actually larger in size because it's a shorter. Anyway, you're saying /29 or smaller, I would assume. So we just need to perhaps use that language because it's not entirely clear. Thanks.
Thank you, Kathy. Rear microphone.
Mike Burns from IP Trading. Could you go back a couple of slides? there was some language about requiring reassignment for customers who would be advertising their address outside the network of the underlying provider there.
This one?
Yes. Do I understand that? So the reassignment has to include the POC information if the reassigned block is intended to be routed and announced outside the provider's network. That's my understanding. And to me, that's an implicit understanding that blocks are in fact assigned and allocated and routed and advertised outside of the underlying address holder's network. And I just want people to bear that in mind as we discuss the utilization of non-connected networks in another proposal. And so these things do happen. This is evidence that this happens. And this, I think, and I support this proposal, would do a good job in recording relevant information for those holders who are announcing a network outside of their provider's network. Thanks.
Front microphone?
Allison Woods, State of Oregon, ARIN-AC. I support this policy because I think there was a bit of intimidation in reassignment and reallocation, especially for the small players, and I believe that this will clarify things in the future and also improve the community as a whole because we will have more accurate information on the entrance.
Thank you. John?
I just want to go back to a previous speaker, Kathy. As it turns out, I have the same phobia about shorter, longer, larger, smaller when it comes to prefix sizes and address blocks. As it turns out, the policy statement in the proposed text is clear, though, because it's each IPv4 reassignment or reallocation containing a /29 or more addresses shall be. So the policy text is clear. It was just the slide that used nomenclature.
Yeah, it was my bad. I should have typed smaller.
Bad, Alyssa. Far microphone.
Kevin Bloomberg, The Wire. I support the policy as written. I, like Mike Burns, noticed the significant change from a shall to a must when it comes to the connected networks. I look at it a little differently. Multi-homed networks would then be required to have detailed assignments. It's not just about a non-connected. It's if you are advertising out and you have your own infrastructure and you have permission to use those blocks, you are now absolutely required. And I think that is a fair change. I hope networks actually do implement it that way, and I think in many cases historically they have. The one question I have related to this policy is off the first page when you made the change to getting rid of who is. Use the word valid. And I guess it's a question for staff or for down the road. Is valid valid technology choices? Or more importantly, in my mind, is valid that the systems are actually up and operational? And if they're not considered valid, what does non-compliance actually mean? I'm just trying to understand that because I know we've had this discussion about our who-is servers and their lack of visibility and what the word valid in this particular case means.
So could you give me the statement, policy statement reference to valid?
If you can go back to the first or second slide, that's what I was referring to. Okay, red line, I think it's the next one. There we go. Valid
Okay,
directory services.
Yep, thanks. So right now, that's not a defined term in NRPM. So it would be something staff would end up creating language for. We would literally put on the website, valid directory service system is X. At this time, that would be SWIP and our who is, unless you guys want to have it be something else. It might be RDAP as well, I guess.
John, I can respond to intent there. So that was changed actually since the last meeting due to feedback that we should point towards section 3.2. And so valid was just to say it complies with section 3.2. That's what the intent is of the language there, but I understand your.
Like I said, I absolutely support this as written. I would love to see that page, which then details it from a staff perspective. And I would go so far as to say valid must include the uptime and availability of that data, or it's not really valid.
Okay.
All right, front center microphone.
Hello, Scott Johnson, SolarNet 1. I am in support of this proposal in spirit. However, as a network operator, I am unclear as how I should proceed under a certain set of circumstances, which I will detail. So I have a customer who comes to me, and I assign or reassign a /29 to them for their purposes. I SWIP it. I make a POC for them at their request. Okay. Then 3 months down the road, they don't pay their bill. A month later, I shut them off because they haven't paid their bill. What do I do with the POC? What do I do with the SWIFT entry? Am I responsible to modify, update, or otherwise delete that? And if I do so, or if I'm required to do so, how is that data retained and where for forensic purposes in the future in case they used that portion of the network to do something nefarious and then it would come back to me later?
Well, I can address part of it. Part of it is, if indeed you end up with a POC in the database that's completely unreferenced by any, has no resource associated with it, then we now have an operational policy that is causing us to remove orphaned points of contact. And so it will get swept up at that point.
And
So,
I don't have to take action?
you don't have to take action. You should take action.
Okay.
You're not required to.
Okay.
If we said you were required to, then we'd be being disingenuous to all the people who have left all the POCs in for the last 20 years, which are now currently being swept up in the orphan POC. So try not to create more orphans, but we'll hunt them down and kill them when we get a chance.
Okay.
All right, last call to join the queues, and we'll go to the rear center microphone.
Joe Provo, Google, ARIN-AC. I support the policy as written. I just wanted to ask to have second red line brought up to.
Tell me when, Joe.
When?
That one, where we're talking about intended to be announced outside. Nowhere does that say unconnected. It is strictly regarding, at the time of the writing, thinking about multi-homing. Should the LIR policy come forward, obviously it has other implications.
Thank you. Front center.
Thank you. So I have two comments, one for myself, Chris Tassett, Tassett Law, ARIN-AC. I support this policy. I think in the larger context of trying to encourage directory database accuracy, it's important to try and eliminate any information that we really don't need from the database and make life easier for people. So that encourages people also not making errors or just filling things in with junk. All right, now I have a remote participant, Anthony De La Cruz, who has the opposite view. Speaking for CenturyLink, we believe that for the majority of our customers, the detailed is the way to go. It passes the abuse responsibility to the actual end user and sets them up to be able to configure feedback loops that require a legit, verifiable abuse contact. We find the extra contact info with email and phone number have aided numerous times law enforcement activities. Our systems are configured by default to set detailed on most all submissions we make, and we inform them via the sales team we collect and will publish this. We would not support this policy.
Thank you. Front center microphone again.
Owen DeLong, ARIN-AC. I'll start with the last comment and work backwards. I don't think anything in this proposal prevents CenturyLink from continuing to use detailed wherever they want. It just provides better options for people who wish to not do so. So I'm not sure about their opposition in that context, and I'd invite the commenter to reconsider. I do think that the word valid adds nothing but confusion in the previously discussed red line, and that the sentence without that particular word stands just as well and provides less confusion. SWIP or a directory services system which meets the standards set forth in section 3.2 is a fine sentence that doesn't send people looking for a definition of what is or isn't valid. It spells out quite clearly that the standards are set forth in a particular section. So I would encourage us to make that small one-word change. That's it. I support the policy.
Thank you. Fire microphone.
Chris Woodfield, Salesforce ARIN-AC. First off, support the policy as written. Second, agree with Owen's comments regarding removal of the word valid from the red line. I think that's a perfectly valid comment.
Boom.
Completely unintentional, too. Third, I wanted to address Scott's questions about creating POC records for his customers, and at the risk of expanding the scope of this discussion, I wanted to point out that there is another policy. I jumped up before checking whether or not it's in recommended draft state or not, that would restrict the creation of POC records to the organization itself. So it may be the case, soon that you as an ISP will no longer be creating POC records for your customers for detailed reassignments. So just be aware of that may be something that, if we adopt that policy, will be coming down the line. Exactly, yes.
Front center microphone.
John Sweeting, ARIN staff. Yeah, Chris, that's exactly right. Actually, it's a already passed policy that is being implemented as we speak. It will be deployed most likely in our March deployment. So as of March, no ISPs will be able to create POCs and org IDs for their customers. That'll have to be done by the customer.
Any follow-ups online? Chris, any follow-up remote participants? Yep, go ahead.
Sorry, Mark Costers, ARIN staff. Sadly, it is not VC enabled. What is that? Oh, this isn't a comment for the policy.
All right.
Thanks, Bill. This is a comment regarding the IPv4 transcripts. We're not working on the remote participation.
Yeah, okay.
All right. At this time, we will move forward to seeing a count of support. So get the counters ready. Counters ready? Good. All right, so at this point, I will ask those in favor of the policy to raise their hand high and hold it there until otherwise told to lower. Keep holding, keep holding. Are we good? All right, thank you. And those who are against the policy as written, please raise your hand high and hold it.
Bagged.
Battle Alyssa number 2 today. All right. We'll give a second for those who are remote to perhaps get their comments in. I know there's a little bit of a delay there.
I'd like to take a moment to thank Alyssa for her presentation.
And we will wait for the counting to be concluded. Do you have any stand-up routines to break the silence, John? No? All right. Thank you. All right, total in-person and remote participants, 126. Those in favor, 35. Those against, 1. Thank you for your feedback. It'll be forwarded to the AC for their review and consideration.